So here we are, episode 13, talking about the long form content for intentions and how that plays into deviations and how that's going to play into the has-op. So as you're seeing on the screen right now, you have some nodes listed out, and then we have the intentions of those nodes, and then we have the operating parameters. This can also be called the node intentions as well. We've broken this out a little bit differently than what you can see, but that's basically what it is. So the key factors, if we look at node 4, the reactor system, we have flows, we have pressures, but a key factor of this reactor we can glean from looking at the intentions is if you look at that temperature, we have a operating temperature and we have a max temperature. So we have that operating temperature at 300 and we have that max temperature at 500. So what you don't see on the screen is basically in our process control, if we reach that 500, we're gonna reach a runaway reaction situation. So this type of information is important in our intention for our team to know when they're going through the process, how much of a problem is it if we deviate from those intentions that we talked about. So as you're seeing now on the next screen, it's just a short little form to show the deviations we would look at, but as one of those deviations is temperature, that's the thing we're going to be looking at. And these are some common things for a reactor that we would look at: flow, pressure, temperature, composition. We may look at agitator, mixing, those sort of things, or it may be like a reaction deviation from a runaway reaction. But we're going to cover it in cooling. Okay, so now on the screen we'll take a look at the worksheet. And what I want to do is talk about the two different ways we can cover this based on the fact that we know the intention or we don't know the intention. So we can still cover it either way, and realistically, even if we know the intention, we could still cover it the other way, which is the worst case scenario as we talked about in the short form video. So as you look to the bottom here, we have temperature controller, TIC, 1, 2, 3, super simple process, right? And we're saying that fails and we lose cooling on the reactor. The aspect of this cooling on the reactor acts as a heat sink for the exothermic reaction. As we know, with exothermic reactions, we need to have a heat sink there. And if we don't have that heat sink, we reach a runaway temperature. And that temperature we've defined is 500 for this process. Okay? So if we know the intention and we know the cooling and maybe we have some other cooling on the system, this first consequence here, when we talk about it, we said we lost cooling or we reduced cooling, which the process is still only going to get to about 450 degrees. All right, so we don't reach that runaway temperature of 500 degrees, which would be potentially a catastrophic failure. The second way to talk about it, and like I said, we may want to talk about it this way, if we have the intention, is we just lose cooling. That's what it's there for, to protect us from the runaway reaction. And we say, well, what happens if we get to 500 and it runs away? And there you see in the second part of our consequence where we have shrapnel, personnel exposure from a loss of containment principle. As we'll talk about in other videos, we then get into safeguards and risk ranking and all those sort of things. But the things I wanted to point out is in all scenarios of this, we can always look at a worst case scenario for the team. Now, worst case doesn't necessarily mean that it's an uncredible scenario, but it's a worst case thinking about what is the intention of that node. So we talked about a little bit earlier what the parameters and the operations are in the intention, but we really also want to focus on what is that cooling jacket doing. In this case, it's providing a heat sink for our exotherm. So that's very simple for our team to think about, well, what happens if it doesn't do the act that it's trying to do? So that can be taken throughout the entire PHA with a bunch of different myriad of failure types and scenario types. As always, it's better to have the intentions and the parameters if you have them. If you don't know them going in, obviously the team can come up with this information. If you get to a scenario and you really don't even know what it's even used for from an intention perspective, that's where then you want to make a note and say, hey, we really need to find out what's going on with this line before we cover it with the team. Hopefully those examples helped out, give you a better visual of what we were talking about in the short form content. We'll be putting out more episodes, going through the standard, and giving you more examples to help along the way.